Well, welcome to another episode of What to Say and How to Say It. I'm Nina Rosner, and I'm with our favorite licensed professional counselor, Kyle Hargrove. Now, what we talk about today is going to rattle some cages, ruffle some feathers, potentially. I'm just going to issue the warning right now. It is not politically correct in our current culture to talk about the differences between boys and girls. There, I said it. And
I'm scared to death.
yeah, you're right. I don't believe that for a second. Kyle's from Texas. So, there's that. I don't see him being afraid of nothing. So, well, maybe his wife on a bad day.
Amen.
She's one of my favorite people too. So that was meant as humor. And at the same time, we need to recognize that things are so upside down right now. Like there's a full-on assault against identity in our culture right now. And it is designed to confuse, to distract, and to dismantle the identity that we have in Jesus Christ and as men and women, Christians, followers of God. I want to talk about some biology that manifests itself in behavior today. And I don't know why I need to say this, but can we just say that there are some very simple biological, obvious differences between men and women? And I'm talking about sex. And I'm one of these closed-minded individuals that believes there's two genders. Now, I will say that there's probably a spectrum of how assertive that men and women are, which is part of masculinity. And there's some spectrum in terms of how nurturing men and women are, which is one of the aspects of femininity. But I would say that both genders possess those things to a certain degree. And there's some real serious differences. Some are obvious. I'm not going to go into them. You're not a 3-year-old. You know what they are physically. I mean, hello. If you don't have a uterus, just saying. And there's things that go along with that. Kyle and I were just talking about the hormone vasopressin, and it is a bonding hormone that men have so much more of than women do. Women, we're drowning in oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone. And yes, both men and women have these both, but women will bond through eye contact, and it takes a lot more for men to bond. And they're different than we are. And I think if we don't understand that, matter of fact, I know if we don't understand some of these differences between men and women, we're going to fail in the relationship space. So, Kyle, before we got on here, we were talking about just how dads play with their sons differently than moms do. And you were telling me a story about one of your kids. Do you mind repeating that?
I'm happy to. My oldest son, Adam, who is now 34, about to be 35. When he was probably 4 years old, a Saturday morning, I'm sure, he and I were tussling in the floor, probably during the commercials of the cartoon that we were watching together, and we were wrestling, and he was a wrestling fan at that time of the crazy wrestling, the ones with all the names, the titles, not their name, but the title that they were given. I never was, but loved to wrestle with my kids. And I had him in a headlock, and I had his head up here, and I was giving him noogies in his thick mane of hair, which he still has. And I don't know how, but I let him reverse me, and he got me in a headlock, and he's giving me the noogies, and he stopped. And I said, "What's wrong, buddy?" And he says, "Dad?" "Yes." "Your hair sure has a lot of skin in it." And it was, one of those things that happens, one of those times where for a person like me, being speechless is something that you can count the number of times it's happened. And that's one of them. It's right there. I did not know what to say. Mm-hmm. I wanted to send him to his room, but I don't think he would have understood that. So no. Anyhow, it's a funny story. It's a fun memory. I don't know that he remembers it. but he knows the story.
Mhm.
So we talk about it all the time, and it's just a great piece of the family tapestry.
Sure. One of the things I love about that story, well, actually two, is there's two elements of being men, primary differences between men and women in that story. The first of which is the tussle and the noogies and the roughhousing that men do with children, especially boy children. Like that's so common, even in rats and monkeys. Like that's a thing. That's normal. Physical tumble, rough and play. That's normal for men. And women, we don't do that on average, right? These are generalizations for sure, but that's how we look at what's generally true. We don't, that's not our go-to. We're more nurturing and snuggly and talking about feelings and those kinds of things. And there's nothing wrong with either of those things. Both are necessary for the healthy development of a kid. The other thing that I really appreciate about that is men are more direct in their communication. I'm sorry, right? Like really. Oh, but they will tell you the truth. That's one of the things I love and admire about men is that they don't really pull any punches with people. And women, it makes us crazy because we're like, oh, I wouldn't have said that. It'll hurt your feelings or hurt their feelings. But what's also true is it's admirable. It's a trait that's honesty in a lot of ways that you wouldn't otherwise have. So I appreciate the directness of men. I always know where I stand with the men in my life because of
especially
that.
4-year-old men.
Yes, there are not a lot of filters there. Oh man. So when you do a lot of work with couples, and you're looking at typical behaviors that are, let's go with the not useful first. What do you see women doing with men in a marriage situation that's not useful because of like gender differences?
Well, I thought I had an answer to your question until you added that last phrase, because of gender differences. However, I think the answer still fits, so I'm going to go with it. I don't think women feel the freedom to be as assertive. We're not talking about opinions here because they can certainly be assertive with their opinions. But I think that there is a struggle sometimes in that relationship for women to feel safe or comfortable enough to tell the truth about their feelings when they know that it's not going to be received well. And so they're secretive. And then not all men are the brightest crayons in the box, but we do know our spouses well enough to know that when they begin to be secretive, that we begin overthinking and can create some of the most fantastical storylines in our head about what's probably going on. There's nothing even close to the truth. So I think that hesitancy to be transparent about what they think or feel in certain situations is one of those things that you just don't typically see men do that. Men will struggle with something for a little while, but it's way more difficult for them to tuck it away somewhere and go on about life as if it's not there. And that's not a criticism. I think it's just something that the different genders do differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And you see the biology showing up in the Big Five personality index, cross-culturally around the world. On average, women are 11 or 12 points more agreeable than men are. And that's not, we're so much better. That's not it. It's manifesting, like you say, we don't tell the truth sometimes because we're being agreeable, people pleasing, calming things down so we don't have conflict. And, because I think inherently, and I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about this, is that we know that conflict's bad for infants. So we're going to acquiesce and that kind of thing naturally. I will say that my marriage got so much better when I stopped lying. Do you think that men appreciate that? The truth telling piece, or would they rather have a brutal truth or deal with the secret thing that you were just talking about?
Ultimately, I think, if if men would take the time to sit down and think about it, is a big ask of a lot of guys. But I think ultimately we'd prefer the truth. It's not always enjoyable. It's not always fun. It's not always pleasant. And we don't always understand it or agree with it. But again, we're talking about someone else's truth.
Mhm.
And that's why it needs to be communicated, so that we can compare our truths and come up with a balance of what we can actually live with as the truth. And that's, you always hear one side of a story, and it's probably not the wisest thing to really invest in that story with a lot of counsel or advice or anything, because you haven't heard the other side. And we have a tendency, all of us do, to pad things a bit in our favor when we talk about conflicts that we've been in. But I think as a rule, men would rather get the thing done and get it over with and move on.
Yeah.
And that's why the withholding of feelings or thoughts is something that, it keeps that from happening. So I think we'd rather deal with the situation, even if it's unpleasant, and move on. You catch us by surprise, and nobody wants to be caught by surprise, but sometimes that's the way the truth comes out. The truth is not always planned.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always the intent of somebody to lay some truth on you in love, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But it does happen on occasion. And so sometimes when we haven't prepared for it or didn't expect it, it can be a bit more awkward. But all things being equal, yes, tell me the truth, let me deal with it, and we fix it and move on.
So, a lot of times women will think about massaging the message so that it's, there's a kind delivery, and, there's a lot of respect, like if we take the time to do that. And there's like, I don't think any gender has a license or the corner store on rudeness, because I think we can all be just rude. But I think a lot of women think that if they're going to be respectful in the way that they communicate, that they're somehow selling themselves short. And so their approach isn't often really useful. And so I would ask you, as a dude, and I'm not asking you to represent all of mankind, but, in general, based on what you've seen in your practice and what your own experience is as a man, if a woman has something, challenging, a hard truth to tell a dude, what's the formula that she should follow with that? Like, how should she go about doing that?
Well, I want to ask you a question first.
Okay.
Because you just said something that almost looked like something shiny, and I took off after it. But you said women have a difficult time sharing things respectfully or with respect. Can you clarify that or chase that a little more?
Well, I think it's super disrespectful to use complaint as a mechanism of communication. I think that you're expecting somebody to read your mind and fix your problem, and that's childlike. So being respectful means I see you as important, valuable. Yes. And so I'm going to treat you that way in the way that I communicate with you, which means I'm going to give some thought to that. I discover over and over again that most women don't know how to be respectful of themselves or their husbands. Like, that's pretty common. And so I'm curious as to what your thoughts are around that.
My thoughts about it in general, and this is probably not going to be a popular thing to say to women either, but I think women sometimes feel that their complaints or the issues give them a position of power. And being respectful, and let's just say assertive rather than aggressive.
Yeah, fair.
Okay.
Yep.
Means they're giving up the power. They're giving up that position, and they don't know what the response or the reaction, it could be one or the other, is going to be. And the problem with this, the biggest problem that keeps flowing through my mind as we have this conversation, is when there is no respect, there will be no resolution. And in a confrontation based on a conflict, the only way to find resolution is to forget about the idea of there being a winner and a loser.
Yeah,
or a right and a wrong.
Yeah, you were talking about winning and losing. Yep.
Yeah. And because there's no respect in that.
Mm-hmm.
So when you take that confrontation, which is probably one of the most avoided, the word is not avoided, but the actions are, people will do anything to avoid a confrontation. But when you have an intentional confrontation about a real issue that has evoked real emotion, it is imperative that regardless of whether you're the initiator or the responder, it's imperative that you come to that place with intent to resolve.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires that you show respect to the other individual. And it's not natural. It's it goes so against our human nature. That's one of the most difficult things about it.
It can be, yeah. And I like to think, well, if I just had all the Jesus, then maybe I. And the more of him I get,
I have
the better.
Jesus. I have Jesus. Yes.
So this last weekend, my husband, I'm putting these garden beds together, and they're galvanized steel. I got 4 of them. They're monstrous. They're huge. And there's like 150 bolts in the stupid things. And then I've got this other one that's got 100 bolts itself. Like, it's just ridiculous. And I'm laying out the landscape cloth. I'm going somewhere with this, by the way. I know I just gave you a glaze. This is all related. Hang with me. I just did a girl thing. I'm sorry.
I'm just wondering if there was a set of instructions for these things, because if you use them, then, okay, well, that's fine. Some people use instructions, some people don't.
Yeah. Well, so, I'm going somewhere with this, and it is related to what you just said. So, anyway, I lay out the landscape fabric, I tack it down in a couple places, but I'm not like fully committed, because there's something that's not quite right about where I placed it. And I don't know what it is. And my husband comes home and looks at it, and he goes, huh. And I see gears, right, turning in his head. And he doesn't say anything but, huh. And I'm thankful for that, because it gave me an awareness that there was something, and I kind of knew there was something. So the next day he comes to me and he says, so are you open to talking about the placement of the garden beds? And I really wasn't.
Especially if you have already invested time and effort.
I'd done all this work and all the things. But I also, like, we bought this farm together over the summer, and I value him, and I want him to be invested. And gosh, here, it's his property too, right? So here I am. And I think those respectful thoughts are inspired by the Lord, because the flesh that I was like, no, I've got this, because I've been gardening forever. Like, I know stuff. But I was like, so what are you thinking? I asked the question. I was open, because the Holy Spirit prompted me, and I was open. And he's like, I don't know that they're aligned with, angles and things. It just seems like the placement's off. And I was like, oh, yeah, you might be right about that. Can we go look at it? So we go out there. Sure enough, they were not, like, there's 3 angles I could have picked. I picked none of them. They were not in alignment. And I didn't know what was off about it. And I'm not stupid, but I did not see that, because I don't have the greenhouse that's going to go with them. And in the interim, it just looks stupid where I put them. And I didn't. Yeah. So he saw that. And then he helped me move them. And he's like, why didn't you ask me to do this with you earlier? He says, your hands must be so sore from putting these things together. I said, yeah, they actually are. He goes, come here. He gives me this big hug. And he's like, I would have helped you with this. These are heavy. I said, well, I didn't know what I was getting into and I thought I could spread it out. He goes, let me help you finish these. And I was like, oh my gosh, and I have this, oh, my heart's in my throat. I just feel all loved. Back to what you were saying, though, is resolution win-win. Like I could have been, no, that's where they're going. And then I'd have been on my own with that stupid garden. And then it could have like 10 years from now, because those things are going to last forever.
Oh, yeah.
Still bone of contention. Now, what do I have? I have connection. I have a partner in gardening. This is hilarious. God reinforced all this because I saw an article like the next day about how incredibly good gardening is for your longevity. And I've always kind of wanted my husband to be partners with me in the gardening thing, but he's never had any interest or time for that, not his hobby, but he's interested now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is so cool. And I feel so blessed. I could have totally screwed that up. Like I was this close to ruining it all. Yeah.
And you were frustrated.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what is frustration?
What is that? There's something over that. Like I was feeling probably I wanted to get it right and I hadn't, and I knew that.
Does frustration come out of logic or emotion?
Oh, it's emotion.
Yeah. And it's not that we don't all get frustrated and emotional when we do. But can I draw a picture for you here?
Yeah, please.
Based on your story?
Uh-huh.
The two things that innately we are created as are emotional and logical.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Every human being has a thinking and a feeling capacity. Now, I happen to believe that the primary capacity in there is the emotional part. Now, I don't have to be taught to be scared or afraid.
Fair. Yeah.
I don't have to be taught to get frustrated. That can happen. I can do that all on my very own. Okay. But to be logical, I have to have examples of how certain thoughts go together with each other to solve a problem, to resolve an issue.
Yeah.
Now, I can think, but I can't be logical without a lot of trial and error or having someone teach me. But I can be afraid all on my very own. Okay. So when we're trying to solve a problem, one of these categories becomes the one that's going to carry the water. Okay. And that is logic. Problem solving is about being logical.
Yeah.
So whether we realize if we're a good problem solver when it comes to relationships, I'm not talking about Legos, all right? But when it comes to relationships, if we are skilled in problem solving and having effective, resourceful confrontations, it is because we either consciously or unconsciously put the emotion aside and focus on the logic of this. This is the problem. These are the things that are happening. This is how long it's happened. This is when it started. Blah, 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 blah. And we begin to put logic to it in order to solve it.
Yeah.
Therefore, and this is sometimes it's hard to wrap your brain around this, since God created us as emotional and logical creatures. But at times, emotion becomes the natural enemy of logic, like the cat to the rat. The cat's the natural enemy of that barn rat. And emotion can be the natural enemy of logic because it totally takes away the ability if emotion is running the show. How many people that are very emotional go into a confrontation without even having an objective?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Without thinking about the who it is that they're talking with.
Yeah.
Without having thought through what's the worst case scenario here, because I better think about what that is before I go into this confrontation, because it might not go my way. And if I can't live with the worst case scenario, I might want to tap the brakes just a little bit. So a lot of people, when they're emotional, they rush in, they basically throw up what's on their mind and what's, what they're feeling. And sometimes it's who wants to catch that? I don't want to catch that,
Well,
but what what Jim did
yeah,
was the fourth step in this thing. He asked for permission to proceed.
yeah,
Would you be open to having a conversation about that? Is respectful.
it was. Yeah. And
That has promise and opportunity
huge.
all wrapped up in it.
Yeah, because if he'd have come in and been like, "Well, that's a stupid place to put those,"
Or
I'd have
would you like some advice?
yeah,
That wouldn't have played well either.
yeah, exactly, right. But he was respectful to me, which made it easier for me to be open. I want to be a respectful person no matter how somebody treats me,
Yeah.
to be honest. But it makes it easier when we're both respectful, right? And, as you're sitting here talking, I'm going, oh my gosh, like this is it right here. We had this huge connecting moment, and it was connecting for both of us because vasopressin is the male connecting hormone. So men that go to war together, and you see these 90-year-old dudes still talking about their war buddies, right? Because they survived a thing together. They met a challenge, they solved the problem. Team building, when that came out in the 70s and 80s, like it was the bomb.com for corporate America because it was mostly men. And they're like, yes, I don't have to feel so alone. I have people at work that I can connect with. This isn't as awful as it used to be. It's not the daily grind anymore. And so what women need to know is that when men are given space to solve a problem and to have input and meet a challenge and overcome it, then that is a cool place for bonding for them.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't understand how that works because we're not like that. We just want to be listened to and validated. Like that's pretty much it. Held, hear me out. Don't criticize me. Don't, we're oxytocin based. Men are vasopressin based. And so understanding that, it's like the whole thing. I could have blown up that whole garden thing and it could have impacted us for 20 years.
You bet.
But because I know enough and the Holy Spirit was louder than my flesh, like, let's just be honest there. And let's be truthful too. I mean, Jim set it up well as well. He was so kind in how he brought that up. I would love to see more people doing this kind of interaction. What do you think are the things that get in the way? Because not all men are kind like that. They're just so direct. But when they're not as direct with each other at work, they're more respectful. But when they speak to women, a lot of times it's condescending. So like, how do you help men get into a space where they'll be more respectful towards women? Or is this all up to women to be respectful in their behavior and have boundaries and then facilitate that? Because that works too. I don't know. What do you think?
How you're approached has a ton to do with how you either react or respond. And I'm wrapped up in and around the concept of transactional analysis, which has the 3 ego states of a parent, an adult, and a child. And of course, most parents are adults, but it's not who you are, it's how you're behaving.
Right.
All right. And if we are approached or talked to from an ego state that causes us discomfort or causes us to respond from an ego state that we don't want to be from, that will frequently cause us to shut down. Another thing is to not be the I don't know person. Okay. Because the I don't know it's not only an unacceptable answer in the midst of a conflict when you do know. Okay. You do know. But we say I don't know because we haven't thought it through enough to feel confident and comfortable about sharing what we think. We're too lazy to think. Okay. You don't know. You don't want to know what I think.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to tell you because you're not going to like it.
Right. Fair.
And I forget the fourth one, but I have 4 things that I talk about pretty frequently when it comes to the I don't know. But maybe it's that I don't know. No, it's not that one. But anyhow, it just, I think clear and concise and simple. Okay. Because I think men are equally willing to confront conflict, not necessarily as the initiator or the responder, but just to be a part of it. if it's kept simple and concise.
Yeah.
But so another one of those things that you say, what helps men do this better is one thing. That's all. Just bring me one thing. It's not one thing helps us. Just bring me one thing.
Yeah.
Let's focus on one thing and not start bringing the past and our, scorekeeping and all these kinds of habits that both men and women have.
Mm-hmm.
But you asked me the question, so I'm just thinking from the standpoint of being a dude, of what a dude is more likely to respond well to, instead of feeling forced to react, to defend, to protect myself. That's a lot different than a response. No, which means I've taken a second or taken a minute to think through, to observe, to read the room, and then be a part of the conversation instead of the target of the conversation.
That is so true right there. It is. And it sounds like such a trite thing. Just talk about one thing at a time, have a short conversation. Okay, fine. And then they think long suffering means, well, I can endure listening to you crab at me and complain for 2.5 hours. Like,
and
no,
while I'm at it.
Yeah. No, don't do that. Like, this is such a game changer. I'm so glad you brought that up. Like, in our marriage workshop that we do, it's a huge deal when I work with the men in the couples space and the women, but separately. And I told the guys, I said, you need a boundary. Don't let your wife, because this is what women do, because in our heads, all this stuff is connected. But we don't, and if we're dealing with women, we can bring all that connection in and add depth to the understanding and the empathy with it. That's not useful with men. They need the one thing. And it's not because they're stupid. It's because this is how logical brains work. They're more systems oriented. And so if you're going to know your audience, to your point. So if you bring one thing, you're going to be met with, this is what happened. This is how I felt about it. I'd like to see this instead. Here's a solution. Can you do that? Or do you have a different idea? Be open to whatever he brings and then move on from there. Well, that's it. Have a 5-minute conversation instead of, and by the way, you did this last week, and that was even worse because it was connected to my sister-in-law and how she reacted to da-da-da, and then you missed the kids at soccer and da-da-da. Yeah, you've lost him at that point.
Yeah. I, as an ADD, a diagnosed ADD person, the way that I describe it for me to help other people understand it is, it's as if in my brain is a television screen or a monitor. And that's where I see things that I think about. Mm-hmm. But I don't have the remote control. Somebody else does. And they keep changing the channel.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a very frustrating thing at times.
Yeah.
Not just to me, but to the people I care about who love me or want to love me, but they're not sure they can, because I can't stay focused on anything long enough. But it's that, I just thought about that when you were saying, and this and that. And last week, it's like you just made me ADD, whether I am or not.
Yeah. It's
because there's too many flying, spinning plates here for me to tend to. And yes, all over that. I need one spinning plate. I can handle that. Let me just keep turning it,
Well, and I would say that's something we can learn from men to be effective communicators all the way around. Like, it's not useful to use complaint as a change agent. Even if it works better with women to do that, it just is not wise. The energy around that's really bad for us emotionally, psychologically. There's tons of data on that. And so it's more appropriate and more adult to say, hey, this happened and here's how I feel about it. You stay in the moment with one thing. Yeah. If you let things build up, bad on you. Like, wipe them off. You didn't deal with it. It's too late now. Like, what just happened? Deal with it now. Deal with the thing now. Talk to God, work it out, but then don't keep a list of wrongs. You didn't deal with it. It's over. Move on. And the problem with not doing that is it builds resentment, expectations, and then destroys marriages.
Yeah.
It's brutal.
And resentment is the blood pressure of the emotion. The silent killer.
Yeah.
Okay. Resentment builds up. But when we start getting resentful, we start keeping secrets.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want to have a confrontation with somebody you love about is, you're not being fair to me. And resentment is always tied to those two words, not fair.
Mm-hmm.
And the longer we hold on to resentment, the more it kills us from the inside out. It's poisonous.
Yep.
It's toxic.
Yep.
It really is.
It eats the relationship too. It's so awful. I just hate that. And people don't know what to do. And so, that's one of the reasons that we offer the resources that we have.
Yes.
This has been such a great conversation. What's one thing you would hope our listeners walk away with around this topic today?
Well, it's not a new thing. And it's something that I think you and I probably have discussed at least a couple of times in our meetings together, in our podcasts. But the one thing that I think we've got to carry with us into a confrontation is the willingness to be open-minded. And to remember that open-minded does not mean, well, I'm going to hear you out. I'm going to let you talk.
Mm-hmm.
That's not being open-minded. That's being decent.
Right.
Being open-minded means we're going to go into this confrontation and I'm going to leave open the possibility of changing my mind about this.
You're talking
And
about being humble.
anything less than that is not open-minded.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not. I'll fight you on it. So if there's one thing I would say, it is go into confrontation with your spouse, with your boss, with an open mind, because there's a real high probability that although we think we know everything about the situation, we don't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fair. That's good.
That's my story and I'm sticking to it.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kyle. And I want to remind our listeners, you can get free tips on how to deal with this stuff, how to stop walking on eggshells, find your voice at greaterimpactcouples.org, greaterimpactcouples.org. Got a free PDF for you. You can learn more there. Thanks so much for coming by and listening. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and stick around for the next episode. Have a great day.